Hey, everybody, welcome back to Your Full Crew podcast. I am Dawn Zoldi. We are on the Tilt, the Tech Industry Leadership Talks with Greg Fortier. He's got a very long duty title, so bear with me here. Greg is the Vice President of Fires, Aviation, and the Missile Defense business for SAIC. So it's holistically the Army business for SAIC down there in Huntsville, Alabama, the organization's second largest locations. So, Greg, so great to have you with us here today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I look forward to the conversation.
This is going to be amazing. And everybody, reminder, we are live. So if you have comments, positive encouragement, or questions for Greg, drop them in the chat and we'll address them as we go. Greg picked a really cool theme, and I can't wait to dig into this, Greg. So you picked this theme of, quote, humble preparation yields confident execution. And so right off the top, I want to ask you, what do you mean by that? Why did you pick this one?
Yeah, so it's something that started early on in my childhood and development through early years of school, growing up in Connecticut, and then certainly going to West Point. The need and the absolute criticality of preparation and how it manifests itself through any walk of life. So for me, I went to West Point and realized really quickly that I was not as great as I thought I was as a high school senior. And then I started to learn the importance of preparing with my teammates, preparing with my peers, whether it's on the baseball field or executing training for the Army. And then as an Army aviator, very much the same. You can spend a whole career, which I did, almost 30 years of flying helicopters and fixed wing airplanes, and both in the operational side and the experimental side, and realizing the importance of what you're doing. It's not necessarily the flight itself, it's all that preparation that goes behind it. So in order to execute confidently in whatever you're doing, you got to be willing to put the work in.
No, I love that. We're gonna go back in time, of course, and walk through this journey of your life that kind of informs this theme that you're talking about. But I kind of pinged on the word humble, and when I think about, because we've all heard, right, the 10,000 hour rule, practice makes perfect, all of the different expressions that kind of lend itself to this idea that preparation matters, right? But your theme has the word humble in it, and humble really, the dictionary definition is, quote, having or showing a modest or low estimate of one's own importance. And I just found that really intriguing, that you didn't just say preparation, you said humble preparation. And so can you peel that back a little bit more before we kind of go back in time to your childhood?
Sure.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, I can tell you, you don't necessarily associate Army aviators with humility, say. You don't necessarily associate air cavalry soldiers like myself with humility, or frankly, experimental test pilots, or some of the things I was fortunate to do. And quite frankly, I wasn't the most humble guy growing up, and I was a fighter from a very small town in Connecticut, trying to make my way. But what I realized, and I realized, you realize it through excellent training. Had a great boss out in Hawaii, one of my first duty stations, who was always willing to do the work and put the work in. So from a humility standpoint, are you getting up an extra hour early and getting to the airfield to do the extra work to get there where nobody's watching you? I talk to my daughters about it all the time. They're both athletes, basketball players and track stars. And are you going out to the track on a Sunday when nobody's watching you and struggling through a workout and struggling through a time, and just trying to fight your way through it so that you can, when the lights are, you can execute effectively? Same goes for combat operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Same goes for experimental flight tests. And quite frankly, same goes for even high-level engagements in the Pentagon, or some other things that I was able to do as a project manager.
Yeah, absolutely. Humility is key when you think about leadership, especially the servant leadership, that it's clear that you exuded throughout your career. By the way, Greg, we've got Olga out there. She is a super fan. She comes to all of our shows. She's a regular on our Clubhouse, and she's saying good morning. So, hey, Olga, good morning to you. Thanks so much for dialing in, and for everybody else out there. Well, I want to go back in time then, Greg. Let's talk about that beginning. You said Connecticut is where you're originally from.
That's right.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, kind of the formative people and events like in your childhood that made you who you are, made you this kind of humble, preparing leader
Yeah.
that you became? Yeah.
Yeah. So not a lot of humility, quite frankly, in the early days in Connecticut. So I was naturally drawn to the athletic fields. I always wanted to do well in school, obviously, and from a very blue collar town called Terryville, Connecticut. It's about 10,000 folks today. Wasn't necessarily that large back in the day. The only claim to fame for Terryville is it's about 3.5 miles from ESPN headquarters in Bristol, Connecticut. So
Oh, okay, cool.
so we're that blue collar town outside of Bristol, and small high school. Was drawn to the athletic fields, and was drawn to some really influential coaches who knew how to push you at the time, knew how to set the conditions for your success, but also knew that if you wanted to take an extra 50 ground balls in the baseball field after practice, they'd be there with you. If you wanted to get in the cage and hit for another 15 minutes, they would throw. And, I'm 49 years old here in a couple of weeks. And I'll tell you, I don't know how those guys were throwing all those baseballs to us, because I certainly couldn't do it today. But there's so much learned on those fields, and as Mr. says at West Point, upon the fields of friendly strife for sowing the seeds that on other fields and other days will bear the fruits of victory. So, you learn so much with your teammates. You learn so much about yourself. A lot of failures, quite frankly, a lot of struggles, and you wake up the next day and you kind of go after it. Had a coach who was a staple in the community. He ran the youth baseball program, and didn't have any children of his own, but he poured his entire life into the kids there in town, in 30 plus years. And he passed, unfortunately, way too soon due to cancer. But just as I reflect and look back on my life, I realize how much I learned from him, just from the service perspective. 2 hours before a game, he's there working on the field as the commissioner of the league, or just always giving his time and resources to the kids in the community.
Well, right there, I think that role model you had infused this idea of preparation in your mind, right? Because, I'll be honest, I was never an athlete. I was kind of more of a book nerd. I was a dancer. Fun fact, everybody.
Yeah.
Really true. And dancers are athletes in their own right. I did that through high school, but preparation is key, especially in sports, right? I mean, I married a coach. My husband is a lacrosse coach, and I'm surrounded by lacrosse players in my house. So, I see that this idea that you have to, like you said, be out there 2 hours early. And in the case of lacrosse, I know my husband always talks about stick skills. If you're not on the wall,
Mm-hmm.
if you're not practicing outside of official practice,
That's right.
you're never going to get better. And I think those lessons that you learned as a child absolutely translated into your time in the Army and your time now at SAIC and in life. So thanks for so much for sharing that, because whether it's athletics, whether it's someone plays piano, that preparation is always key, and it really, I think, helps formulate who people become. Looking back, whether it was your coach, whether it was your parents or other friends or family members, was there like one saying, if you will, that kind of jumps out at you in line with your theme that you learned along the way?
Yeah. So we talk about the preparation, obviously, in the athletic fields. Also, in the classroom was incredibly important for me. We didn't have a lot of money growing up, so I knew if I was going to go to college and go to a good school, I was going to have to make my way in some way, shape, or fashion. So you take that drive that's there, and you couple that with some sort of a neurotic behavior of I don't ever want to fail at anything, certainly in the classroom, and then you pair all that with a high school math teacher named Eleanor Woik, who was as old school comes, and she was the pre-calculus and calculus teacher in my high school. And that's a picture of my grandmother we were showing. We'll talk about her a little bit later. But
Yeah.
but Eleanor Woik, her saying was very simple. She said, I don't really worry about the grades or anything like that. You guys can worry about grades or whatever, but you're going to get the grade you deserve. So whatever you want to put into it, because at the end of the day, and we've heard this phrase again more publicly in recent times, but the standard is the standard, right? We can't move the standard, right? So
Right.
whatever that is, it is, and whatever you're doing, it is, and that's always something that stuck with me, and I think that's why I was such a a great fit for me to go to West Point, because there are tasks, conditions, and standards. And you knew what the task was, you knew the conditions to execute it, and you knew where the standard was, and you worked until you met that standard.
Well, that idea of you get the grade you deserve, also underneath that is the fact that if you don't prepare, right, if you don't do your homework, if you
That's right.
don't know the math, the formulas, you are going to get that grade you deserve. And no, I think it's so cool how teachers and coaches, as you mentioned earlier, can make such a difference in people's lives. And clearly that is the case here. I know in my case, I had a history teacher in high school, and frankly, it was just like a basic skill, right? This is how you do an outline. And if I didn't have that skill when I went to college, I wouldn't have succeeded.
Yeah.
So it's just little things like that along the way that you learn from people, whether it's a saying or whether it's a skill that you garner from them, that really, I think, puts your life on a trajectory. By the way, Greg, I'm listening to your story, and everybody out there, this is the first time I met Greg. Okay. This is not like scripted. We haven't back and forth. And I'm also from blue collar. I'm from Philly.
Mm-hmm.
And like you, I made my way into the military, and I didn't go to the Air Force Academy. I went after law school, direct commission, but I find our stories have a lot of different synergies. It's just always so interesting to meet people and learn about their past. But let's talk about that education. So you had this incredible math teacher that inspired you, like, hey, work hard, get those grades that you deserve. And then at some point you said, hey, I'm going to apply for the United States Military Academy. Now, you were an
Yep.
athlete, a baseball player. Did you play other sports as well, or was it like
I
singularly
did.
baseball?
Yeah. So in actually, it goes back to seventh grade. Went on a field trip in seventh grade. My home economics teacher had a daughter at West Point. So we went up to West Point in October of 1987 to see her. She was a softball player at West Point. So school trip, and got up there and stood and watched lunch formation out there. And I thought, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Now, how do I get there? And it was, well, they don't take kids from Terryville, Connecticut. And in fact, there's only been two kids I know of that have gone to West Point from Terryville, Connecticut. One a few, 6-7 years earlier than me, and then myself. So started on this, like I said, a somewhat neurotic journey to achieve as much as I possibly could in every facet. So played soccer, basketball, and baseball in high school, small school, so I could play the three sports. Successful at all of them. Actually, probably was a better soccer player than a baseball player, and ended up playing baseball at West Point for a while. But looking back, maybe I should have played soccer. But just loved the game, loved everything about it, because baseball is a game of failure, and if you fail 7 out of 10 times, you're actually doing quite well in baseball. So the journey started in seventh grade, and just started chipping away and talking to folks, and investing in practice, and investing in the games, and trying to round out as much of a resume as I could. And in fact, the thing that almost held me back was very poor standardized test scores. So while I had excellent grades and valedictorian and all those things, 3-sport athlete, it was a struggle to get the test scores necessary. Was never a good standardized test taker, never will be. And so that was it.
And everybody has their strengths. And, for everybody out there, if you don't know a lot about admissions at the various service academies, I worked for a number of years at the United States Air Force Academy, and was at some of those around the table discussions, which obviously I'm not going to get into, but involving admissions. And I'll tell you, the bar is super high. And, Greg, I mean, it's just super, it's amazingly impressive. Like you said, no kids from Terrytown ever go to West Point. For you to, without really having a family member that had gone there, some kind of a legacy, a direct connection to West Point, in spite of your valedictorian status and your multi-athlete status, to nevertheless still get in. I mean, that's pretty huge, everybody. So just so you know, that all of that again ties into this idea of humble preparation to get where you want to go. By the way, Shannon Knutson is out there with a great quote: "Whatever you do, do it well, and the doors of opportunity will appear." Obviously, Greg is a living example of that. So you get into West Point. Tell us about that, because all the service academies have their own culture.
Mhm.
You saw a formation, you saw the structure, and you're like, "This is for me. That's where I want to go." How was it? How was West Point? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so as hard as it was to get into West Point, it was much more difficult to graduate and get through West Point. Because
No
as you know,
doubt.
we lose, you lose one of it out of every four. And we joke, a dear friend of mine, my roommate the last couple of years there, still a dear friend. I talked to him this weekend actually because his San Diego State Aztecs have advanced to the Final Four, and he actually did a couple of years at San Diego State before he joined the West Point team. But just 1,432 days of highs and lows.
Not that
More
you're
highs.
counting, right? Like,
Yeah, not that we were
you
counting,
all
right?
like set a clock the minute you get there, like
That's
only
right.
1,232 days
It's
left.
a few days, few journey, but no, I mean, my experience was by and large fantastic. Like I said, I got up there; it was the right spot for me to be. Meeting some incredibly talented folks from all over the country, developing friendships and bonds. I think I had the fundamentals and the core traits to be a good teammate. What I didn't have was, hey, I'm not that big a deal anymore. Because you can be a big deal in a small town and realize that you're not that big a deal. So all that was fantastic, and I wasn't like I was driven to become an aviator. In fact, I actually thought about being an infantryman or an armor officer, and then junior year I took a test for aviation and thought, okay, well that worked out pretty well. So played baseball, like I said, for a couple of years, for 3 years up there, and that was brought its own set of challenges, and frankly more struggles than joy, because at that level it is very much a job when you're balancing
Right.
your time and those kind of things. But still great teammates and folks that I still see around today. So um, learned a lot, grew a lot, and became much more humble through the process. There's nothing like taking a test and thinking, yeah, I did very, very well. And, or turning a paper in and say, this is the best paper you're ever going to see in your life. And you get back 150 comments on it that says maybe you're not so great after all.
Yeah,
So,
that'll definitely break you down a little bit and make you a little bit more humble. And we put this picture back up, Greg. I love this. This was your grandmother, you said, and you
yeah,
and your
yeah.
West
So
Indian
she's,
friend.
it's a big part of the story. Obviously, she passed in 2006, but as a very young kid in Connecticut, I spent a lot of summers as 8, 9, 10-year-old kid over her house, and she was a no nonsense. She may only be 4'10", but she had the stature of a 6'10" lady, and no nonsense. Very much the standard is the standard, and taught me some critical lessons about just growing up, and but at the same time, incredibly loving and caring, and always taking care of. I can imagine. I can only imagine the number of people she bored at breakfast talking about me at West Point when I had gotten there. All her friends.
So I'm sure she was super proud to talk about you. I'm sure you learned so many lessons at West Point. I'm sure they had a lot of different kind of mottos or sayings as well. Is there anything from your time at West Point when you think about this idea of humble preparation and you know execution that kind of jumps out as something that stuck with you and that you still use today?
Yeah, so obviously everybody's very familiar with the honor code, right? And being have the utmost integrity. For me, it translates forward to being trustworthy and being trustworthy in any walk of life, and that's pretty simple and sounds very benign, but it's very, very powerful. And I can translate that to whether it's a boss I worked for, or whether it's a situation I was put in where I had to earn trust rapidly, or whether I was willing to put the work in to prepare so that if a question was asked of me, right, that not number one, that I only had the answer, but number two, I had the courage to speak the truth, whether it was convenient or not. And as we get older, and certainly as I got older through the Pentagon and some engagements there were some very inconvenient truths that had to be told at my expense, frankly, and that's okay, right? Because if I put the work in and I'm trustworthy and I'm innovative in my approach and I can evolve and be precise in my communications, then I can live with that at the end. And really that's all that's asked, right? And I said, we talk about the long gray line and we talk about being a part of that. I had said on graduation day, whatever happens in this military journey, I don't know if I'm going to do 5 years, 20 years, 26 years, whatever it is, I'm going to discharge the duties in a manner that is expected of somebody of the long gray line. And, not easier said than done sometimes.
Right. And obviously it was a great journey because you were in it for the long haul. I mean, you retired as a colonel.
I did.
You rose up to that rank and highest field grade officer rank and did a lot of amazing things. So let's talk about that. I think we have a great picture of you with your helicopter here during your career. So here we go. You did well in that aviation test. And then is this a Chinook?
No, that's
Is this
a OH-58 Delta Kiowa Warrior. So Arm Scout. So
okay?
side by side tandem cockpit. It weighs about as much as an F-150
Oh wow, okay.
truck, and it's just small scout. Goes about 100 to 105 miles an hour, and the mission is to fly low and to be that air ground integration component to combined arms battle, working with infantrymen, armor officers, what have you, being the eyes and ears out front, executing those scout type missions. So I love that photo because it's the culmination of a lot of hard work that I was fortunate enough to be assigned out to Hawaii, my first duty station, and worked for a fantastic boss right out of the gate. And it was a legacy unit, so it was a unit comprised of a lot of Vietnam veterans. So I learned a lot of that old, wise aviation techniques from those folks. And then at about 15 months into my tour, that unit disbanded, and I worked for another guy who's my best boss. And he was as technically and tactically sound as anybody. But more importantly, he was a coach, he was a teacher, he was a mentor, he was against the grain, he was innovative. He took, he just didn't check the block, and he cared more deeply for his team than ever. And I can tell you, we're 23 years past those days, and we still get together as a group in the summer and talk about the times that we had, and the best team builder I've ever worked for.
Wow, that's amazing. What do you think that he did lent itself to such great team building?
So the one thing he did was immediately he had as good of ability to do an environmental scan of his team as anybody I'd ever seen. He could identify the various levels of talent. He didn't expect everybody to be an A+ player, but he could weave the B players in with the A players. He could invest in the A players to make them A+ players. It didn't matter how old you were, and this ties actually quite nicely to an old basketball coach I had, where if you were a sophomore on that basketball team and you were as good as a senior, the sophomore was going to play.
Right,
That's
right.
not a common decision today, right?
No,
And maybe not a common decision back then either. But you have 3 more years in his program, he's going to develop you and give you the opportunity to succeed. No different than what Jeff Kapman did for me out in Hawaii, where we were some young guys, some brash guys, quite frankly. While we knew that, while we were always willing to prepare, while we were always trying to be precise, while we're always trying to execute a mission perfectly, which there is no perfect mission.
no.
But in the end, he would keep giving us opportunities to succeed, and he would give us opportunities to grow and to stretch the limit and to push the limit in a prudently aggressive fashion.
No, that's awesome. I mean, when I think of a person like that, the term talent management comes to mind. I think that's a buzzword people use today, but to be able to identify what people are good at and what they're not, and build a team around that and still include people and leverage those strengths that they have for what they are, that's huge. And not a lot of people have that ability, honestly. It sounds like throughout your Army career, you're running into these leaders that prepared you to be a humble leader by watching, kind of how they engage with other people, and just lifelong learning of the good, the bad, and the ugly from everybody you run into. I think that's huge. But so you tell us just briefly, and you've got this incredibly impressive resume, and we're not going to have time to go through everything, but you did 2 combat tours, right? You were in Iraq and Afghanistan both. And then eventually you flip over to acquisitions, and you're making your way through the Pentagon as you get more senior, as tends to happen to us, right? Like all that fun, cool stuff, like in your case, flying helicopters, like, no, we're going to put you in a building to run around and do contracts now.
That's
Fun
right.
stuff. Yeah, yeah. But I think we have got a great picture of you maybe during one of your deployments. So tell us a little bit about this journey.
Yep. So that's January of 2000. So it's we had landed in Afghanistan. That's Kandahar.
Wow.
We had landed in Kandahar on December 28th, 2002, and to me that was it was so much relief to be there. I was sitting in the library of the Quantico Marine Corps base, on Quantico Marine Corps base, as a part of a Marine Corps advanced schooling on 9/11, and there was nothing more
Yeah.
helpless than being there and not being able to help. To get in your car to try to drive to DC and get turned around, and then to sit for 18 months, um, waiting for an opportunity to go. So that was a sense of relief. It was a very, very unique time. Only 10,000 American troops in country at the time.
Yep.
Had the great chance to, or great opportunity to work for now retired four-star General John Campbell. He was Colonel John Campbell at the time. His lieutenant colonel was Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Flynn, who's now the four-star in charge of the Indo-PACOM theater. So
Okay.
just heroes that were walking among, just a young captain who was trying to find his way in combat. So a culmination of a lot of things, a lot of relief, but more importantly, I'd been in the Army 6 years at this point. Felt like I was, tactically sound. I knew I had enough energy to do whatever I needed to do. I knew I would fight as hard as I had to, and I knew I would work for the 406 people that were in our task force as hard as I could. So really cool to have the opportunity to see all that training and see how well you'd done, and quite frankly, see how well you'd prepared. You can't be prepared for it all, but you can certainly be prepared for most.
As they say, most plans do not survive first contact
That's
with
a
the
fact.
enemy. That's
That's a fact.
that's on the battlefield and certainly in life, including in the Pentagon. So, you do these incredible combat tours, you're learning along the way, you're preparing. How did you get into acquisitions? How did
Yeah.
that happen?
Yeah. So another unique twist, and another uh, time in my life where I was making plans, and God was smiling at me, telling me he had a
Yeah,
different plan.
always.
Right. So I get home from Afghanistan, and I'm at Fort Bragg, and I had finished my tour, and I was in command. And at the time, it was 18-month commands as a captain, and then move on to something else for the Army.
Yeah.
So had recently just met my wife, and the best part about me is I'm compatible with about 1% of society. So
That's why you went into the military. It's only
that's
1%
right.
of
That's right.
society.
That's right. So when I met my wife, I knew that I better do something quick. So all that to say, I was ready to transition out of Fort Bragg, and I had orders to teach at the United States Military Academy. So I was going to go get a master's degree in statistics and go teach in the math department.
Oh, wow.
And all that was happening until it wasn't, because we were then stop lost as a unit, and we deployed to Iraq. So I
Oh,
deployed to
wow.
Iraq, had to give up those orders, and did a 1 year tour over there. And of that, I had to make a tough choice. Frankly, was, am I going to stay on this train? And I love the Army. I will always love the Army. I love my service to the Army. The operational Army at the time for me was not intellectually challenging enough for what I wanted to do, and some things I wanted to do. But most importantly, make no doubt about it, I wanted the opportunity to have a family, and I always wanted the opportunity to have a family. It goes back to my days in Connecticut, and I was 28 years old at the time. I had no prospect of having a wife, never mind a family. So it was, hey, I'm going to make this call. I'm going to try to go be an experimental test pilot. It's going to scratch a couple itches, right? The first one is the intellectual side, but most importantly, I thought, it would stabilize my family and give me the opportunity to raise a family and still serve. So applied to the United States Naval Test Pilot School from Samarra, Iraq,
Oh, wow.
from a trailer in Iraq on a dial-up internet connection. Mailed off a packet of 40 pieces of paper via DHL. It arrived in the United States with one piece of paper in the envelope ripped open.
Oh
Uh,
my
I
gosh.
then had to scan the papers, 45 minutes per page, to get
Oh,
that application in February of 2005, and then was selected. And for those that don't know, if you're selected as a naval test pilot candidate, you then automatically are assessed in the acquisition corps, regardless of your standing in the class, whether you
Oh, I
graduate.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
But I'm listening to your scanning story and I'm thinking in my brain, humble preparation. It's
Yeah.
just like, oh
Angry,
my
angry
gosh,
preparation as well. Yes,
angry
angry.
and painful,
Yes.
humble preparation for that. So you became a test pilot and then kind of your MOS, that's the Army term for it, right? Your
Yeah.
military
What you do is you get branched into an acquisition career field, and that is it would be experimental testers, acquisition testers. Did the class and then went on to work some test assignments for the Army. Was fortunate enough to come down during a BRAC situation in Huntsville. Stood up an aviation organization that moved from Fort Rucker. Learned a lot about myself there. Frankly, made a lot of mistakes in that command, and it's where I learned that intensity is great and passion is great, but when you can't run larger organizations at that level and expect those level of results. So learned a
Yeah.
lot, failed a lot, and then was fortunate enough to compete to be the second Army officer to command the Naval Test Pilot School. So was selected to actually go be an Army officer in charge of a Navy squadron for 3 years and off the grid in Pax River, which again was an incredible opportunity to, and that's really where it became all about, how humble can I be? Because I would walk to my office at the test pilot school, and I was a 4,000-hour aviator. I'd flown 39 different aircraft. I had combat tours,
Yeah.
and by the time I got to my door, I had passed 6 people with better credentials that were
That's
instructors at the
unbelievable.
school, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so really good. And then the other side story on really failing and being a dose of humility was actually made it to the final 100 for the NASA astronaut selection in 2009. Got down to Johnson Space Center with 100 other folks, and they chose 9 of us out of that 100. And I was not chosen, obviously, but a great experience, and realizing again, hey, I'm not that great. Right at the end of the day, I'm not that great.
Well, you really are actually,
No,
but
not
I
really.
mean, I'm just like, I'm like kind of laughing to myself because like, well, the operational Army, I'll go be a test pilot, but I think I'll just go fly to the moon instead, like instead of going to Iraq. Well, maybe it's a little safer on the moon. I'm not sure, but uh, so many lessons along the way. There might be young people out there listening, or hey, you know what, you don't have to be young to learn and get good career advice from someone who's had the kinds of experiences you've had, Greg. So what advice would you give to someone out there that's listening about their career or their career path?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's remarkable to me after all these years, certainly working for SAIC now and transitioning out from the Army into this opportunity and working on our counter UAS stuff, something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And I know we'll talk about here in a little bit, but it's amazing how it comes full circle. In 2004 and 5, I was essentially in my helicopter a counter UAS solution where I was flying over folks
Yikes.
shooting RPGs and AK-47 rounds to protect folks on the ground. Now I have the
Yeah.
opportunity to work with my talented team to develop that solution. But back to your question, and I talk to our workforce about this all the time at SAIC. It's learn the fundamentals, whatever the fundamentals of your job or chosen path are. Learn them, understand them, and really master them. The second piece is find your mentors. Don't be overly aggressive, because if you do all these other things that I've been fortunate enough to see done and do myself, folks will want to mentor you. So don't be aggressive with that, but find your mentors. You can't do any of this on your own. And what was humbling for me was when I retired back in ceremony was in March of 22. I had people from 11 different states there. I had all these people through the journey, just really looking at, or really just giving an opportunity to thank them along the way. And then we've talked about preparation, right? And we've talked about being willing to put the work in, and that's a huge piece of it, right? But also understanding, like, establish the standards, right? For whatever standard, whatever you think the standard is, define that appropriate success, and then chart that path. whatever that is. For me, it's easy early on in regimented in the military, where you can take those steps, and when the next opportunity for promotion is, or move, or job, or whatever it is. But again, I talked to our brilliantly talented folks here at SAIC, and as you said, second largest site. We have 2,200 folks here. Be willing to do the work, and then chart your path appropriately. I was a guy who, for 26 years, I didn't really follow the mold of what the Army wanted me to do, and sometimes that comes with danger. But if you are willing to believe in yourself and to bet on yourself, things tend to work out.
Yeah, the last point you made, that saying, plan the work and work the plan, comes to mind.
Yeah.
But, as I'm listening to you, Greg, it's really, and I see this, all the different people I have the blessing to interview, true leaders follow their passion.
Right.
And you did that starting when that spark occurred in you in seventh grade, and you saw those West Point folks and said, I'm going to be a part of that. And now at SAIC, running this ginormous division, doing counter UAS. So tell us a little bit about that, and then I want to talk about, you're not going to escape me, by the way, without talking about balance, because you made some career decisions based on family, which, by the way, super impressive. Honestly, a lot of us don't like to admit that. Many of us don't do it at the expense of our families, quite frankly. But and the picture, everybody, that we had showed, and we'll show it again in a sec. But we popped that up because that was Greg's retirement photo with his family. So we'll talk. Okay, here it is again. We'll talk about your family here in a second, but I want to talk about SAIC and what you're doing now, because it's kind of now this culmination of a journey of humble preparation and confident execution. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I transitioned out of the military late in 2021. Was my last duty. I joined the team almost immediately upon because I thought it to be a great idea to only take 48 hours off from my last duty in the Army to join work. So
right.
All that to say, the very first day I was in the building, we had an internal meeting on counter UAS and solutions, and whether we as a company were going to push all in on this critical mission, right? And this very, very important mission. And what I didn't know at the time was the company had been working on this mission for about 10 years. And there were various different platforms being used in the Air Force. There was some 2012 Olympic stuff we had done. There's some New Year's Eve stuff that we had done in 2015, G7 Summit, some other things. But really, it was about taking it to the next level. And I sat in this meeting, and I thought, I smiled again, because this is not my plan for my life, right? This is God's plan for my life. And I just chuckled to myself and said, this is awesome, right? We have incredibly technically sound people. We've got a courageous workforce. We've got a courageous leadership that will invest in this technology. And they're giving me the keys to the car down here in Huntsville. Hopefully I will not mess this up. So we've been on this 15-month journey now through demonstrations. Have done 2 successful demonstrations in Yuma, Arizona. I've gone head to head with some other companies. And what's unique about our approach is that we are a truly technology agnostic solution. So we've been here for 45 years in Huntsville. We are software experts. We take best of breed technologies and we make them all work together. And there's nothing more there's nothing that I'm more passionate about in the DoD than doing that, because that's the future of warfare. That's the future of any conflict. Is, can you have an open system in your technologies and in your capabilities that then can plug and play and adapt to the threat. So we have 14 best of breed technologies right now, whether that's a detection capability, whether it's an identification, a tracking, or mitigation. It can be kinetic, it can be non-kinetic, it can be mobile, it can be fixed, radars, cameras, whatever. And the beautiful thing about it is we have competition going on, obviously, in the DoD for counter UAS, and we're a part of that competition. But we also have competition going on internal to our own team, because these other companies are fighting to be on our best of breed list, of which it's about 60 plus companies. So, competition provides the best kind of behavior, always will.
No, it absolutely does. And honestly, there's, When I think about counter UAS, I think of it in terms of an enabler. You're talking about on the battlefield, certainly a combat enabler, and on the commercial or civil side, right? Certainly an enabler for the drone industry, because if you're not protecting the skies against the careless, crewless criminals out there that are going to do stupid things and create problems for everybody, that there's no way that the whole industry is going to succeed. And of course, on the defense side, we're seeing this I know you would agree with this, Greg, like this unprecedented use of commercial off-the-shelf drones in warfare in Ukraine and Russia. And this idea of counter UAS is just increasingly important, not just on the battlefield from a homeland security standpoint, and certainly on the commercial industry side as well. Fun fact, I think Defense Solutions is in your portfolio. I remember Ravi's presentation at Edge 2023 in Las Vegas. And I mentioned them in an article, an op-ed I just published in Newsweek, because it's a cyber solution. But to your point, every situation is going to be the solution is going to be situationally dependent.
Yes.
In other words, there's not a one size fits all. So I love your approach of having a lot of different companies in your portfolio that you can plug and play and intermix and switch up for depending on what the actual customer or client need is. I think that's really critical. We are 3 minutes out, and you are not going to escape my balance question. So go ahead, put the family picture back up, and the third time's the charm.
Sounds great.
You made a decision to kind of leave the operational Army, go the test pilot route, acquisitions, took a different path based on family. Balance is one of those things that is so hard for people to achieve. Do you have any tips or tricks or any advice on this idea of balance, especially someone who is always preparing every day?
Couple things. Number one, I really like my job. So let me just say one more thing on counter UAS. Okay. It is absolutely, tailorable, scalable, modular, and layered, right? To your point. So there's great power there.
Yes.
And I can kind of weave that same piece into your question on family. The best technique I've used, everybody thinks, how can you be this intense? How can you be this motivated? How can you be so driven? And your family must not know you. And I can tell you right now that I'm not the best dad in the world, but my family knows me, and I'm there, and I'm present, and I can tell you what my daughter ran in the 800 5 meets ago. I can tell you what, how many points she had 10 games ago. And that's a lot of the, that's not only the reason why I went the test pilot route, but to be completely candid, I have a 9th grader and a 7th grader. And I think I had a little bit longer path to go in the military. I could have served another 4 years or so to get to 30 years. And, we're independent of any kind of additional roles and responsibilities, but I was not missing these years of their lives. So first of all, you got to be bold enough to make that decision. Secondly, you've got to understand how do you balance your time, right? And that's where West Point comes in. I use a technique that I've learned in the military. It's called 2-12-3-7, right? So it's 2 hours of spiritual and physical something a day, right? 2 hours of that, whether it's going running, working out, got to keep your mind right. Got to be physically strong. 12 hours of hard work, whatever I'm doing, right? I'm committed to SAIC. I'm working. Sometimes that's 15, sometimes it's 9, but 12 hours. 3 hours of something else, right? And that something else for me is my kids and their stuff and their homework and their stuff and their meets and all that work. And then 7 hours of sleep. I used to be able to get away with it at 5 hours of sleep, but now as I am touching my 5th decade on Earth here, 7 hours of sleep is the deal. So 2-12-3-7 is what I use, and then quite frankly, knowing urgent versus what's important, right? Not everything is urgent. Most things are important, right?
Yeah, wow, that is sage advice. Loving all of that. We are at the end of our time, but we're not going to end without our very quick lightning round. So we're talking like 10-second answers.
Sure.
Ready? 3 questions.
All right.
We're gonna fire through. Favorite book?
Point Man, Steve Farrar.
Okay. Hero?
Grandmother.
Oh, and one leadership tip you learned along the way that you'd like to leave to others?
Oh my goodness. One leadership tip.
Just one.
Know yourself and seek self-improvement.
All right, very good. Well, thank you so much, Greg, for taking this time. It's so wonderful. I hope I get to meet you in person.
I do too.
Everybody, SAIC is sponsoring our networking event for Law Tech Connect in Denver on May 7th. So join us and certainly come to our Law Tech Connect workshop at AVSI Exponential. And then we're going to have Robbie on a panel at Energy Drone in June in Houston. So talking counter UAS. So really excited about all of that. So great to meet you. And everybody else, thank you so much for engaging. We are out here.